All right, let's dive into a huge topic in the software world, monoliths versus microservices. Every single app you use is built on some kind of blueprint, what we call a software architecture. And trust me, choosing the right one can mean the difference between an app that flies and one that, well, falls flat. Let's get into it. But before we get all technical, let's start with a little thought experiment. So imagine you get a flat tire. Annoying, right? But what if, to change that one tire, you had to take apart and then rebuild your entire car? The engine, the seats, everything. Sounds completely insane, doesn't it? Well, in software, that's a very real problem that architects are trying to solve every single day. And there are two main ways to tackle this challenge. So today, we're going to break down the classic all-in-one approach, the monolith. Then we'll explore the more modern, super flexible world of microservices. We'll put them head-to-head, see how they'd work for building something like an online bookstore, and then wrap it all up with the key takeaways you absolutely need to know. Let's start with the original. First up, we've got the monolithic architecture. Now, this is the traditional way software was built for years. And you know what? For a lot of projects, it's still a perfectly good place to start. So what in the world is a monolith? Well, the name kind of gives it away, right? Mono means one. It's one giant single piece of code. Think about it. Every feature, user logins, payments, product catalogs, you name it. It all lives together, all tangled up in one massive code base. And when you need to update something, you have to deploy the whole thing as one giant unit. Okay, so that's the textbook definition. But what does that actually feel like in the real world? The best way to get a handle on this is with a couple of really simple analogies. Okay, picture a big old-school department store. It's one massive building, right? And inside, you've got all your different sections: clothing, electronics, furniture, everything. Now, what happens if you decide to renovate just the electronics section? You might have to close off entrances, there's dust everywhere, and it disrupts the entire store for everyone. That's the perfect takeaway for a monolith. Even a tiny change to one little feature means you have to rebuild and redeploy the entire application. It's all or nothing. Or, here's another one. Think of a Swiss Army knife. You've got all these awesome tools packed into one handy unit. But what if the scissors get dull or the screwdriver breaks? You can't just pop out the old scissors and put in a new pair. The whole unit is compromised. And this shows just how tightly everything is connected in a monolith. A bug in one small part can actually bring down the whole system. And this leads us to the biggest problem. Over time, as you keep adding more and more features, that clean, simple application can turn into what developers call a big ball of mud. Seriously, it gets so complex and tangled that making even a simple change feels super risky and takes forever. And this exact problem is what pushed people to find a better way. So to deal with that big ball of mud, a totally new approach came on the scene: a constellation of microservices. This is really the modern answer to the challenges that big monoliths can create. A microservices architecture completely flips the script. Instead of one giant application, you break it down into a bunch of small, independent services. Each service does one thing and does it well, like one handles user accounts, another handles payments. The keywords you really got to remember here are independent and loosely coupled. So you might be wondering, okay, how is this really that different from the monolith we just talked about? Let's go right back to our analogies to see just how stark the contrast is. So instead of that one giant department store, now I want you to picture a food court at the mall. You've got all these different little kitchens, right? One for pizza, one for tacos, one for smoothies. Each one is its own independent business, its own staff, its own equipment, and, this is key, its own private stash of ingredients, which is kind of like having its own database. Now, if the pizza place needs to close down for a day to fix their oven, does the whole food court shut down? No way. The taco place keeps selling tacos. And that is the absolute magic of microservices. You can update, fix, or deploy each service all by itself. And if the food court analogy doesn't click for you, think about a simple power strip. You plug in your TV, your game console, your lamp. Each device just does its own thing. If you need to unplug your lamp to change the bulb, your TV doesn't suddenly turn off, right? And that's the core idea. With microservices, you can maintain, upgrade, or even completely replace one service without the rest of the system even noticing.
Okay, we've seen both sides of the coin. Now it's time for the main event. Let's put them side by side, head to head, to really get a grip on the trade-offs you're making when you pick one path over the other.
This table right here, it basically tells the whole story. Let's just walk through it. For your codebase, a monolith is one giant file, while microservices are a bunch of small, separate ones. This obviously affects deployment. Monoliths are all or nothing, while microservices get updated one at a time. Now, scaling. This is a huge one. With a monolith, if one tiny part of your app gets super busy, you have to make copies of the entire thing to handle the load. But with microservices, you just scale up that one busy service. It's way, way more efficient. The tech stack is a game changer too. Monoliths lock you into one language, one framework. Microservices are polyglot, meaning the team working on the search service can use a totally different technology than the team on the payment service. And finally, complexity. Monoliths are dead simple to start, but they get messy fast. Microservices are more complex to set up, but they're much easier to manage as they grow. Okay, theory is great, but let's make this real. Let's pretend we're building an online bookstore from scratch and see how these two different approaches would actually play out.
So, if we built our bookstore the monolith way, we'd probably have a couple of really big applications. We might have one main app for the website itself. That would include the book catalog, the shopping cart, and all the order logic bundled together. Then, we might have another huge system in the back for all our customer data, like a CRM. The key here is that these are two giant, indivisible blobs of code. To update anything, the whole blob has to be deployed at once.
Now, check out the microservices way. Instead of a couple of big apps, our bookstore is now a whole network of tiny, specialized services. As you can see here, there's a service just for the book catalog, another one just for the shopping cart, one for orders, one for customer info, another one for shipping. Each one of these is its own tiny, independent application. They all talk to each other, sure, but they can be developed, tested, and scaled all on their own. It's a completely different way to build. All right, we have covered a ton of ground, so let's boil it all down. If you're studying for an exam or just trying to get this straight in your head, these are the absolute most important things you need to walk away with. Okay, so here's the bottom line. The monolith is simpler to start with. It's faster to get a project off the ground. But as it grows, it can become really inflexible and a pain to scale. Microservices, on the other hand, are definitely more complex at the beginning, but they pay you back 1,000 times over with long-term flexibility and super efficient scaling. It all comes down to one key trade-off. Are you looking for initial simplicity, or are you planning for long-term growth? Just remember the deployment difference, all or nothing versus independent, and the scaling difference, scaling the whole thing versus scaling just the piece you need. Those are the big ideas. So in the end, there's no single right answer here. There's no better choice. It's all about trade-offs. So the real question this leaves us with isn't which one is best. It's which one is right for your next project. And understanding these core principles is the first and most important step to making that call.